LaVontae, well, first of all, let me thank you for taking the time out to speak to us today about your mental health journey. You know, this is June, which is Men's Health Awareness Month. During this time, we also focus on men's mental health awareness. We know that's more than just the men's physical health, but it's our mental health that's important as well. And here today, we're going to actually have the opportunity for you to share your story. What this is about is hearing the voices of Black men and the range of experiences we've all had, including how we've navigated mental health issues and more importantly, how we're on the pathway to healing, how we've healed, and how we're continuing to heal along this journey. So thank you. I'm going to go on and jump right on in with my first question. LaVontae, can you tell us a little bit about your mental health journey?
All right. So, and thank you for the time. Extremely grateful just to be here. And so, my mental health journey it's an interesting one, especially just how things kind of played out for me the last few years regarding my mental health. And so, it really became more of a factor for me when I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. It wasn't necessarily something that I took care of. I didn't know anything about it. Honestly, when getting the diagnosis, I even was pretty surprised. I didn't think that was a thing. Having OCD, I thought it was more cleaning, and so I was like, man, I don't feel like I need to clean. I never felt like there was an urge, so I really didn't believe it at a certain point.
Okay.
But then also when I was able to get the education and the knowledge of what OCD looks like, how does it present, what are the different ways that it can look, that really allowed for me to understand, oh, this is the mental illness that I deal with. And so that right there really got me to the point of wanting to understand a lot more about it, but also wanting to help myself in that moment. I never really got a choice to think about like, oh, is mental health a choice or is it not? It was something that I was pretty much forced into because I wanted to feel better. I wanted to not feel in the same way or have the episodes that I was having at the time back in 2019. And from that point, it really allowed for me to, one, understand the significance of what happens when I take care of my mental health, but also it made me understand that I needed a practice. It made me understand that this entire time when I used to hear that mental health wasn't a thing and it wasn't really something that affects men or it doesn't affect Black men, right? We always take on the resilient role, or maybe we take on the, oh, let me internalize it because it'll go away tomorrow. When I realized that this stuff wasn't going away the next day and it wasn't going the next day after that, it changed me to have to understand that sometimes you're going to actually have to work on your mental health. Sometimes you're going to actually have to put in the time and put in the effort to be able to improve those certain symptoms that you do have or reduce some of these certain behaviors that you're doing because of the mental illness that you're dealing with or just mental health as a whole. And so actually from that point, I've really focused on it quite heavily. Just really putting that at the forefront and making sure that there is a certain understanding, one, but also I'm actually tapping into what my mental health is. I'm actually taking the time and being intentional at dealing with it and being intentional at making sure that I know these are the certain things that I deal with on the daily and it's okay. And I think that was a big shift as well, the vulnerability aspect with mental health, especially because just nobody talks about it. Everything is really, I'm good, you know.
Yes.
So that was always my mantra when
Yeah.
it came to my mental health, and it taking the route that I do now, I'm very thankful for it because now I really understand that it's not just an I'm good situation. You really deal with these things on a daily, but a lot of us deal with it. We just don't talk about it. And so that was my shift in really taking control of my mental health, but also taking the active choice and being okay with the fact that I'm not less than with it, but I also can't keep neglecting it as a man.
Yes, thank you for that. You actually hit on a couple of things. One of the first things you shared is that, you know, we're so used, I think we're in a culture where the response is, you know, somebody asks you how you doing, good morning, oh, I'm good. It's
Yep.
an automatic response before you even think about it. Am I actually good? Or how am I actually feeling? Oh, I'm doing okay, good morning. How about you? It's an automatic. I even called myself a couple of times like, that's so automatic. Like you're not even taking the time to really process and think about that. You're just spitting it out because it becomes, you're almost like robotic in your response. And sometimes we're just go, 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 go. We're expected to do all these different things. And you mentioned something else that I want to ask you about. especially over the last couple of years, it seems to be this big push. People are now being intentional about talking about mental health with men, and especially Black men, because it's like you don't talk about it, any issue, push it to the side, just continue to push, continue to work, continue to provide, continue to do what you need to do. But I want to ask you, what do you think is one of the biggest, or if you have one, the biggest misconception about Black men and mental health that you think is in our community?
Biggest misconception I would say, in my opinion, is that the way that healing looks. A lot of people think that healing is, oh, you either have to go to therapy, or oh, you have to do all of these just different things to heal and go through it. When a lot of the time, sometimes healing is just talking. It is really not something that has to be very grandiose. It can really just be talking to someone that you have a meaningful connection with, talking to someone that you're actually connected to. And a lot of the times when we think about healing, when we think about going into that, a lot of people look at that as like weakness, right? When you
Right,
express your emotions, when you, as a man, if you ever say like, oh man, well, I'm not feeling so good today,
right,
which is a normal thing, right? Everybody feels like, you'll say it to yourself, I'm not feeling too hot today, right? I'm not feeling my best self. But if you were to say that, that looks more like, oh, well, you a chump. Or, man, how you not doing the things you're supposed to do? Or it's, no one will accept for you to be able to feel wrong or feel bad on a certain day, because you're always expected to then be the provider or be the one that's always good. And so the misconception that I look at a lot of the times is, what is actually healing? Right? Healing is not this big thing, and it's not it has such a negative connotation around it. It's for men though. And that's the thing. It's really just for men. Now, of course, it's a little bit different based off the gender. However, with that aspect, when they think about healing for us, they think of us like, oh, well, you're gonna get off your high horse. But also, man, it's like, dude, I can be on the high horse and also heal. But
yes,
healing doesn't have to look like this very extravagant thing. It can be me just opening up to you. It can be you just taking out the time to listen without a response.
right.
And that is something that just doesn't happen because people are opinionated. Men feel like we're a burden. We feel like we're getting judged. We also don't want to open up and hear a response that could then be a weapon against us. And so these are these certain ideas and these realities that as men we deal with, that really makes it really hard. And especially within the Black community, because we always laugh at our pain. That's just really what it is.
Yes,
It's an automatic response,
right.
right? Laugh at your pain, which it is a defense mechanism. And the defense mechanism is because if we laugh about it, it makes it less important. And that means that someone's going to talk about it, but we're going to downplay it now. And that's going to at least bring it to the surface. And I'm okay with that. But we don't see that. We don't see that laughing at our pain is not, it's not helping us. But we do it because I'll be honest, I do it.
Oh,
It's
yes.
natural. It makes it feel better, makes the situation better. But deep down and deeply rooted, all that is saying is, man, I have to make a joke out of it because if I was serious, no one would actually listen.
Yeah, the laugh to keep from crying. And thanks for sharing that. And that's one of the other things that I want to talk about. You talked about feeling, the trust, or I believe you're going to use this, weaponize it against me later if I share, being vulnerable. And so to me, that brings up the whole issue, the topic of safe spaces, and men, us having those spaces where we feel comfortable enough to share, to say, you know what, I'm not feeling good today. This is what's going on with me, and feel safe enough to truly, truly be vulnerable and share what's going on. So it kind of goes into my next question I was going to ask you. In regards to safe spaces, we know how important they are. What are some of the safe spaces that have been available to you, or what are some of the safe spaces you created? And then how can we collectively work to help others, with this safe space to create it? Because if I don't feel safe and if I don't trust you, I'm not sharing. Like that's just so. Again, the defense mechanism is I'll just give you enough to pacify
Yep.
you, or I'll do what I need to do to move on. So,
Yep.
can you talk a little bit about safe spaces and how that works in regards with you?
Safe spaces are, I mean, I think about them a lot. And the way that I at least really categorize it, I call them more authentic spaces.
Mhm.
Because safe spaces, right? We can have a lot of safe spaces, but sometimes it's unauthentic. Sometimes, like you said, I'm going to say it just as much as you need me to say, so that I'm good and the radar is off. right? I like to call them more authentic spaces just because it's places where you can actually speak up about real things that you deal with, real stuff that you're actually feeling. And for myself, some of these spaces that I've been in, I've started to go around a lot of men's groups and just really groups that are focused on wellness, men's wellness, which I've never noticed that before. That wasn't really a thing that I did. And so within the area that I'm in, they have a lot of those spaces, but also me being a therapist, I create a lot of those spaces. And I create a lot of those spaces for the young men that I work with. So in that regard, those are those spaces where I actually can see them say, like, man, I'm sad that I don't spend time with my family. I'm sad that nobody really thinks about me when I'm actually at home or when I'm doing these certain things. And these are certain things that they would never really talk about because it feels like, oh, well, somebody's going to embarrass me. Right. And then also, I would say for myself, those spaces that I've created, I run mental health workshops and I also speak. So when I have these engagements, when I have these places, I make sure that within these workshops, one, we're going to get vulnerable. I always make the disclaimer, we're going to, that's just what's going to happen. But two, it's okay if something comes out of you that you didn't know that was there and that you didn't expect. And so when I'm having these spaces, when I'm talking to young men, when I'm talking to older men and things of that nature, I'm really seeing the shift of what happens when you're in these type of spaces. And that's why I had said authentic spaces, because I remember holding a workshop and I was talking and I was just like, man, we talk about safe spaces all the time, but a lot of these people in here, it's not necessarily them feeling safe. They just feel as if, okay, I'm heard, I'm seen. And I'm authentic with me wanting to hear you. I'm authentic with me wanting to actually let you have a voice. And that right there is a big piece of where, as men, we talk a lot. We got the rah, rah, rah. We do all that stuff. But really, it's that internal voice. That internal voice is what's really keeping us down. And when we talk about what is that internal voice, that's that little version of you. And so giving a space where that little version of you that nobody sees that you think has grown up, but holds on to all those scars, holds on to all those different traumas, holds on to all that pain that you never processed, I give that space for that person to come up. I give that space for that individual to really shine because that's where a lot of these different struggles come from. That's where a lot of these different challenges really derive from when you're not able to really talk to that younger version of self. That time when you think that it's gone. And so in these certain type of spaces, it's being able to let that version of you come up. It's being able to let that version of you and just you to know, hey, I got you, my brother. We good. We in the same boat, right? And really, I think in a lot of these spaces, talking about what we're talking about, the it's good mentality. I think that is essential because once you say that, or once you say something that's a generational curse, which I like to say is when we talk about what happens in the house stays in the house. That right there, oh my God, it conditions us to think so
Yeah.
many different things. Like it conditions us just not to speak and internalize everything. We just suppress everything and we deal with everything in silence. And so in these spaces, one is being able to learn about like what happened, like what these things are, because it's harmless in the sense of our families just were trying to parent, right? That's really just what it is, right? It's no harm, no foul. But the reality is that these certain ways of parenting went without processing ever. So now we have this certain conditioning of how we're supposed to move and operate when it comes to emotions as men. And
Right.
in these spaces, it's being able to one, learn the knowledge, but also being able to let them talk about real life stuff. Sometimes it's really just, man, work was so exhausting today. Talk to me about it, my brother. Let me know. Because I got the same exact feeling. Maybe it's, man, dude, you and your kids are just, it's tough being a dad. Yeah, talk to me about it. I don't have a clue about it. You're the expert. Let everyone be an expert of their lives. Let everyone be able to speak their truth and in a way where it's no judgment, in a way where it's you taken away from the fact that I have this certain type of degrees and accolades and all this stuff. It's nah, we just meeting each other. And
Yeah.
so in these spaces, I've created a lot of them because I know it's important, but also I really look at it from the standpoint of let's make vulnerability change into a strength. Like let's really look at that. If we can change vulnerability from looking so weak, so many men can be empowered. So many men can be inspired to at least speak up or at least just communicate what's going on internally so that they don't have to deal with it in the same ways that are maladaptive that they have been dealing with them in
Yeah.
these certain spaces.
Yeah, and it's true. And it's almost like this inner battle. It's like, I've been taught to do this. I've been taught to automatically say, I'm good. I've been taught to automatically say, do not show emotion. Do not share your information. Like you said, what goes on in this house stays in this house. It's almost like back to those things of, I laugh to keep from crying. We say all these
Yep.
things and enact them, but it's almost like it's this constant battle. And the good thing that I think that's going on is that it's becoming more intentional from different organizations, churches
Yes.
included, where they're talking about it. And you mentioned the whole thing with the men's group, the support groups, and sessions that allow people to talk freely, because it is being able to, I tell people, they call it dumping, or to be able to just
Yeah.
open, share. Sometimes it's just like, whoa, I got that off my chest. I feel so
Hmm.
much. It's a
It's
relief.
heavy.
Yeah.
It's
And
heavy, man.
yeah. And a lot of times in those spaces, when we talk about that, I use that when you said, authentic spaces, a lot of times there was a conversation I had with someone previously. We talked about barbershop talk and how
Mhm.
in the barbershop, so much talk. I mean, you have people talking about their health situation, brothers getting on other brothers about, hey, man, you need to go get that checked out, the
Mhm.
relationship issues, the wife, the kids,
Mhm.
all of that. And so, to your point, those are spaces where we can feel, there's authentic, there's the barber, there's others where we have these conversations. And a lot of times it was like, I'm glad I was able to get that off my chest.
Mhm.
But to be able to have these places, spaces, authentic spaces where we can do that with our family, as well, and not always feel the need to, hey, I only kind of talk a little bit about that at the barbershop
Mhm.
around the boys or around the fellas. So
Mhm.
I can definitely appreciate that. You mentioned the groups, talking, having the sessions, letting them know out the front, hey, it's going to be vulnerability time. You're going to have to open up,
Mhm.
share, and it's going to be all
Mhm.
right. What are
Mhm.
some other tools and resources that you yourself use on your journey, and some of the things that you implement and share with others in regards to their mental health?
So some of the tools that I use just on the daily, physical exercise is like huge for me. Like just being able to get out there and get my body moving, get my mind stimulated. I started to really work out without any music. So I do a lot of running. I do a lot of just going to the gym. I call it training. I don't even say I'm going to the gym. I just say I'm training because it's more mental. I'm always very intentional at seeing how I think in these certain situations, seeing what happens when I feel like I'm just too exhausted, or maybe when I'm just not, I'm a little bit off for the gym today. I don't really want to do it. All of these moments, it ebbs and flows. I'm not always going to feel the same way I do. And so I really make an intention to practice and learn, like, what am I thinking? When I'm running and I feel exhausted, I'm like, man, what are some of these negative thoughts I'm having? And I really can notice them and put them at the forefront. And I'm like, okay, they're there, but I'm still doing what I have to do. And also being intentional to have mindfulness. That was something where I used to think mindfulness was really just meditation. So I just was like, oh, I can't meditate all day long, but I do love meditation. I think it's something that's really useful, and it creates a place of calmness. It creates a place of stillness, and that stillness allows for me to be able to really process one, what's going on, but also look at it from, man, let me just slow down, right? And I've noticed that it's so hard for men. We don't really sit in silence. We don't really take the time. We're always distracted. And so I've tried to have less distractions. And if I'm being distracted, I'm wondering more, why am I so distracted? When do I have these moments to really just take a break? So I incorporate mindfulness a lot throughout my life, whether it's me walking my dog, whether it's me going to the park. What I've started to do, some of my good friends, we were at the park one day just having a picnic, and we did something what's called grounding. And I've done it before when it comes to the senses, right? The five senses. And I really instill that with a lot of clients. However, I never did it in the sense of what we did where we were just at the park and they were like, man, take your shoes off, right? Like you're just going to put your feet on the ground, just feel the earth. And I'm like, man, I don't really know about that. I don't know if I really want to take my shoes off, but let's do it, right? Let's do it. And from that moment, it really sparked within me, man, this is what it feels like just to be here at the center. And it's something that you really have to take an intention to do, because of course I knowing myself, I downplayed it when I first did it, but then I thought about it the next day and I was like, man, why do I want to do this again the next day? And so I did it again and I was like, man, I just had to call him back and I was like, I'll be honest, let me tell you, I've went to the park a few times now and I've literally had to take off my shoes and just be here. and just
Yeah.
be in this moment and just having these grounding experiences. And these are things that I talk about a lot when I'm speaking with men in these groups, when I'm being able to really feed into them. One, I teach them one about their cognitions. So I tell them what it means to really focus on your cognition, but I also tell them about cognitive distortions. And that's a super fancy therapeutic way of saying thinking traps, negative thinking traps to be specific. And so I explained that. Sorry about that. That's my dog. So I explained that to them, and I really focus in on what are these thinking traps that we deal with on a daily, whether it's black and white thinking, whether it's the absolutes, right? You feel like you should have something, or maybe it's even overthinking. Let's go to the most simplistic one that we all do,
Yes.
right? We don't know too much about what it is, but the terminology helps, right? When we think about learned behaviors, I teach them about parentified behaviors. A lot of the times they're looking at, well, I got to take care of my family. I got to do this. Where did that stem from? Where did that come from? It had to start somewhere. You didn't just come up and you're like, man, I take care of everything. Well, it was instilled into you when all you had to do was take care of your sibling, when you had to make sure your little cousin was good, when you had to make sure you had food on the table for them, or you had to do this, or you had to do that. All of these things that you now have to do, they started from somewhere. And so teaching them about this stuff, but also teaching them about, I call it TFA, which is thought, feeling, action, fusion. Your thoughts reinforce your feelings, which reinforce your actions, which reinforce a result. And then that goes back to your thoughts. And so I teach them about how this process is going every single day. And you don't even know it. But when you think something, it gives you a feeling. And that feeling then goes to your behavior or action that you want to take now at this point. And I teach them about these certain things so that they understand what's the thought process, what's really going on, what's really happening when you think these certain ways. But also, then going into the fact of understanding what are these coping tools, right? Putting it at the forefront. What do you do to feel better? Like, what are the things that you do? And a lot of the times I'll teach them about the Calm app. I teach them about certain apps that at least they can just take away from stuff. But also, I really try to tell them to just sit down with themselves. Like, if you don't even do anything, just sit down with yourself. Something you don't really have to do, something you don't have to make it into this big deal. Just sit down. See what kind of thoughts you get on a daily. Because a lot of the times, if you were to ask a man, it's like, nah, I'm always on the go. I
Absolutely.
never really have the time to sit down, right? Because gotta go to work, gotta feed the family, gotta do this, gotta do that. But realistically, you make time for everything else.
Yes.
You right? And you make time for these things that you feel people need or whatever you feel like you have to be there for them, but why can't you be there for yourself? So I really try to center in on, are you taking enough time for you? And what does time look like for you? Does it look like maybe you're playing the game? Okay, cool. You can play the game sometimes, but are you being intentional about why you're doing it? I'm playing the game right now because, man, I just really want to enjoy my time. Cool. Or am I playing the game right now because I feel like my brain is just so fried and I don't want to think about stuff that I just have to cope doing this, right? It's two different reasons for why you're doing it. And if you don't understand it and you're doing it aimlessly, or you're doing it, excuse me, without really focusing and thinking about it, sometimes that becomes really harmful. So I teach them about what is the difference between a coping tool and then avoidance, right? Like what's the difference between that? Because it comes to a certain point where we're doing things and like you said, automatic thoughts, right? I'm good. It's automatic for us. So in a lot of these moments, it's explaining to them when you have these certain automatic responses of what you do when you're feeling a certain type of way. When you're upset, oh, I'll go drink. Oh, when you're upset, I feel like I'm closed in. I don't talk to anybody. When I'm sad, I isolate. If you're not mindful of those things, they're going to continue to go. They're going to
Absolutely.
continue to happen. And so it's one, I really feed into the education, the psychoeducation, which really explaining more of what's happening here. How is this really programming a lot of the actions that we do? That's number one. But also talking about mindfulness, breaking down the stigma behind it that, oh, only certain people can be mindful, or, oh, I need to meditate. Because mindfulness looks very different. It's not always meditation, it's a certain awareness of what's going on. If you're outside, okay, what are you noticing? Man, I'm noticing the grass. A lot of the time we're here. We're on the phone.
Yeah, that absolutely. Anywhere.
We're
Anywhere.
on the phone.
Yes.
And that's what it is for us, right? We're so occupied and so fixated on whatever we're doing in the phone, we're not even in the present. And so learning how to be in the present is something that is quite challenging in today's time, especially for men, because it's not something that we've been doing. And although mental health is something that's really at the forefront now, and they're talking a lot more about it, you still have these pop culture type mental health people that share false information or share the wrong things to share. So it's breaking down these certain things, breaking down the influence that happens sometimes from society when it comes to men coping or when it comes to men really trying to instill certain practices for themselves, because it really creates a lot of maladaptive coping. And I do explain to them what that is, right? What that looks like, these harmful ways that we have to cope because we have no other way.
Right.
Sometimes we just have no other choice of what to do. I isolate because I don't have anyone to talk to. Well, okay, let's see some other ways. Let's write it down, right? When you write down your thoughts, you're less likely to fixate on those thoughts because now you have them out in the open. So now you have the choice of whether you crumble it up, whether you erase the words that you put on there, or you can just have it sit there. But if you can do that, that can allow for you to actually not have to fixate on whatever those thoughts are so long, or it's not as intense. Now, of course, sometimes it may be a little different based off the thoughts, but that is a great way and a great technique to be able to at least distance yourself for some of those more distracting or some of those more distressful type of thoughts. And it's really teaching them to learn about these certain things. So really going against the grain with a lot of what men are supposed to do, right? Really putting it to the forefront, like, all right. And that's why I say it's so important to be authentic with it, because not everybody's going to open up. Not
Yeah.
everybody's going to take it for face value either. Like, oh man, I'm not going to write no stuff down. I don't even like school, right? It's like, okay,
That's the best part. So when you mentioned that, and when you talk about the resources and tools, it even goes back to therapy. Everybody has these preconceptions. Oh, it's going to look like this. It's supposed to be like this. Everybody's journey experience is different. And so to your point, the whole, even the grounding, I've done that at the beach. I love doing it and do it often. So I'm glad we're able to have a platform such as this where men can hear some of the things that they can do that they may be exposed to. They like you said, everybody goes outside at some point,
yep.
things you can pay attention to. You have all these different things that you can do to help. And I think that's important too, is letting people know some of the tools that are at their disposal, resources in different ways they can implement and begin to really think about those things, but be intentional. And I think that was one of the things I was like, you have to really be intentional. And I think that that is a big, big thing. So I thank you for sharing that, because that's important. So,
Yeah,
those of you who are watching this later, hey, go on and put your feet down on the ground, put your feet in the sand,
right.
the dirt itself. It's a good thing. It is a good thing. You earlier on you talked about your diagnosis and that kind of springboard. What was that time like? Was there anything leading up to that where you kind of knew something, or kind of people that said something to you before, or was this a routine visit? How did that all come out in regards to the diagnosis and then your transition into beginning the journey?
David, I'll definitely say it was, man, it was such a random like experience. It was so random for me. It was never in my life had I dealt with anything, and that's why I said me being a therapist, it was mind boggling, because I was like, what is going on? I work with clients every single day. How's this happening? And it was such a hard moment for me during that time. It was so difficult for me, and the reason why it was so difficult because this went against everything that I was like I was taught. This went against everything as far as a man being a man, how you deal with stuff, what they talk about with mental health. But I had always known since a kid that I was anxious. I never really knew what it was until I got older, but I knew I was anxious because I was an extreme overthinker, and I would overthink and I would use that as a superpower. I thought that was my shield. That was everything. I was my shield and sword. I used it greatly when I was in school. That just made me stand out because I could overthink and I could always think about a solution. However, I didn't know that that was an anxious response to keep me safe because my environment had been so catastrophic and traumatic. The environment around me outside in the neighborhood, those things were traumatic. So me overthinking was the only thing that I could do to keep me safe. And so I learned I didn't know all these things. And so I knew that I was anxious. I knew that I had anxious type of symptoms, certain tendencies that I did, and my personality was very anxious with certain things as well. That all stems from going through a lot of trauma. Didn't know that at first. And so when I ended up actually recognizing like something was different. It wasn't that it was like this super shift, but I got up one day and I was just like, man, I feel, why am I sleeping so long? I was always very self-aware. And that was something that I really attribute a lot to me learning what was going on with me because I just got up and I was like, man, something's off. Why am I sleeping till like 8 a.m., 9 a.m.? Because I never sleep that long. I'm always up 6 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock. I'm always up at those times. So I knew that was first. The sleeping pattern was changed. It changed. And I just didn't understand why because I was still sleeping at the same time. But then also, it got to this moment of where I started to just have the same thought on repeat. Like, and I'm talking about from the moment I got up to the moment I went to bed. It was the same exact thought. Now, of course, I had different thoughts depending on what I'm doing throughout the day, but it was just random thoughts that all went against my character, went against my values, went against who I am as a person. It was certain thoughts like it would start off in the sense of, oh, you don't like yourself. And I'm just like, okay, that's weird. Like, okay. And then it would be like, no, you don't like yourself. This is why you do these certain things, or you're not who you think. You're not this there. And it was all of these really hurtful ways of thinking. I'm just like, why is this? Why am I saying all this? Like, why am I thinking? And I just would answer, I would answer the thoughts like, nah, that's come on, dude. I know I love myself. And I'm doing this same cycle, just back and forth, back all throughout the day. Sometimes I'm saying it out loud. Sometimes I'm thinking it back and I'm fighting back and forth. And I would notice that I was trying to get an answer from myself, which I'm the one saying the statement. It's like, how can you get the answer from the person that's saying the statement or that's asking the question? I'm just answering myself. And I would notice, like, dude, I'm in this back and forth race all throughout the day, and this just continued. And sometimes the thoughts started to become a lot more negative. Now, this is over a 2 week span of all these thoughts just being this way. Now, this is me without having any type of knowledge on it, but I'm noticing, like, dude, something's really off. Like something's not going how it would normally be. But then also, I started to see my mood shift.
All right.
I stopped wanting to go outside as much. I stopped wanting to do a lot of things. And it was more hurtful because at the time, my significant other at the time, it was a moment where like, COVID was kind of ramping up. Like we just kind of started to see little cases of COVID and stuff like that. And I just felt like once the thought of COVID happened, my thought was on it. Like it was as if like, oh dude, you got that, you're gonna get that, this is what you're doing to, and it's like, why is my thoughts now latching onto this? And so the hardest thing of it was that I noticed a difference in how I viewed love. That was like a big piece for me. And it was at a point where my thoughts would just go to like, you don't love your significant other at the time, you don't love your family, you don't love your parents. What does that look like? And I'm just like, dude, I know I love them. And same thing, looks different, same exact cycle, right? Where I'm trying to say, no, I am this, I am that. And so I started to really notice that was my everyday life. That was what was happening every single day. On top of me wanting meeting with clients, it was like, dang, I was so nervous to even and scared. Honestly, I'll say I was scared to meet with clients because I was like, I don't want their situations to then be on my mind. And now my mind is fixating on that. And now it's making all of these different scenarios and these what ifs that then latch onto that and say it's about me. And so I started to notice this huge shift in my thinking, the way that I was thinking, how I was thinking, what certain thoughts I was getting, what did it feel like when I got these thoughts? And so over that time span of like 2 weeks to 3 weeks, it was more me talking about it, but not talking about it. One, because I didn't really know what to say. I didn't know what was happening. But then also, everybody for me being a therapist had said, oh, well, just stop thinking about it. I'm like, oh, great. That works. I can definitely do that. Yes, stop thinking about it is awesome. Didn't work. And then also they were saying more like, well, you should know what it is. So I felt really demoralized. I was like, dang, I don't know what it is though. I feel like an imposter. And it didn't really dawn onto me that this was something mental illness related or just mental related until I went to my job and I spoke to my supervisor. And I was like, man, is I'm having these thoughts that I really don't like. They're against my values, against my morals as a person, as a man. What is happening? It was like, well, talk to me a little bit about the thoughts. Like, when did you start getting them? And I was like, it was just random. I woke up one morning and it was just, these thoughts were here. It really started with the what if. Like, it wasn't as if
Right.
something triggered it or something from my past. I've never dealt with OCD before ever in my life. I've dealt with anxiety, and that's something that runs in my family. I also can stem a lot of the trauma that I experienced during my upbringing, as far as something that probably like enhance or evolve certain ways of how I became anxious, but never anything OCD related. Never would I fixate on thoughts. Never would I ruminate and have these different compulsions. And I had talked to him. He was like, honestly, I think you should look up OCD. And I was like, but I'm not cleaning. I'm
Are you
not
thinking
cleaning.
automatically we
Right.
when
That's
here? Yes, that
that's where I was at. Like, that was my only view on it because I had never dealt with any OCD related case before. And so I was like, but I'm not cleaning. Like, I don't care to clean. It was like, nah, I think you really should look into OCD. And so at that point, I'm on it. I'm on it. But see, it's interesting as I look at it now today. When I was younger, one of my peers had told me about it was like a house fire. House fire had happened because of plug-in and Christmas lights, everything like that. Big house fire. And from that moment, when I was a child, I was super intentional at never making cords touch, never like overpack, like jam
right.
packing a certain outlet. And I didn't notice what that did to me until I got older. I would always check the light. I would always make sure, okay, no fires, no nothing, go back and check. And I never did that before. And so as I got old, now that I'm older, I realized, okay, some of these certain behaviors was already there, but I didn't know what really triggered that moment, right? It was never anything that I had to worry about because I wasn't worried about anything at that point. But as I go and fast forward now, talking with my supervisor, that changed everything because I went into my office and I was like, okay, OCD, thoughts I don't want. And they were like, oh, it's a theme. OCD has different themes. Sometimes it's germs. Sometimes it can be spiritual or religious. Sometimes it can be eating. Sometimes it can be just pure thoughts, which mine's is themed as pure obsession. That's a different type. It's not one that's most known, but pure O is being more spoken about because a lot of people are having those same OCD type tendencies that are only here. And that's the hardest part of it all. Because when you have pure obsessional, it's only your thoughts. So you're the only one that knows. You're the only one that can see it. So everyone would look at me and be like, oh, LaVontae, you're good. But really, I was going through so much agony. I was going through so much pain. And that's where I really went forward to go then have a therapist. But the only thing is that really pushed me to do that because I didn't want to do it. I was like, even with me being a therapist, I don't want to do it. And it's not that I had anything against it, but it was still those same generational norms. You don't talk about stuff. I was like, I don't want to. I'm cool with being a voice to listen or an ear to listen and be here for you, but about me, I'm cool. Like, I'm gonna do this stuff all on my own. And so still some of these generational curses were still just ongoing. And it's fun because it's just my life. But the biggest shift for me when I really seen that, okay, I have to go get some assistance, was when I woke up and the first thought on my mind was just, I gotta take my life. And that right there was such a huge shift because one, I was so sad and distraught because I'm like, why? And then also it was because, okay, I feel like now I'm not even the man that I want to be if this is something that I'm dealing with. How can I be the man that helps people and the man that says all this other stuff? But also, I was always positive. I never was, and
I,
so that's why it was so strange to me. I didn't know what was going on, but that scared me so bad because throughout the entire day, as I said, I fixated on these different thoughts. That was on my mind. I'm talking to clients, it's on my mind. Oh, you should do it. You want to do it. Oh, this is something, and that's the hard thing about OCD because how can you tell your brain something when it's like, I know this isn't me, but my brain keeps throwing it at me 24/7, and at some point you're going to believe it. And so when I was able to go to, so that right there, one, that started me going to therapy because I was like, okay, I need somebody's support outside of myself because me being resilient, me using my same ways of going about things and just toughing it out, internalizing it didn't work. That my go-to wasn't there. Overthinking it, telling myself, hey, you're good, doesn't work. What else can I do now? So I was at my ends with. It was really me getting to my lowest point, the hardest point ever in my life, to really realize, okay, at this point, it's on me. So I get this choice right now. It's either I'm gonna show up for myself or this is it for me. And I knew for a fact I got more stuff to do in this world. Like I knew it. Even at my lowest state, I was like, man, I got more stuff to do. I really, and I know this can't be the last of, but my thoughts are just like, nah, take your life. I was like, how can I love the person that I am if I want to take my life? And so that moment really showed me something was wrong with me. And then when I went to and finding a therapist was really difficult. One, because I wanted someone that was traditionally more like me. And two, it was because I felt everybody was judging me with that. But also it was still so new to me that I didn't know what to really say, what's going on. I felt like it was something wrong that I was saying, like, I have these thoughts that I don't like. So I didn't really know how to share with them. But when I ended up finding a therapist, it just clicked.
That's good
And
to know. I'll
like
tell
it
you.
could, right?
Yeah,
And it takes some time to find a therapist. You do have to cycle through some. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. But I wasn't discouraged because my want to feel better and to heal was much higher than the discomfort of me having to cycle through these different therapists. I put it all out there. I was like, hey, if you're here and you're ready to, because I'm a therapist, I already know what that process is like. So being on the other side of things, still having the knowledge of what it's like to be the therapist, but being on the other side, thing, I understand the challenges, right? I understand you do have to cycle through different people because sometimes people are just not your cup of tea. But
yeah,
also, one thing I realize is all skin folk, not kinfolk. So just because they look like me doesn't mean that they're going to fully understand what I'm talking about, nor does it mean that they're going to be able to support in the capacity of what I need. And I had to be okay with that. I had to be okay that maybe it's going to be a little less traditional. And so that one piece right there showed me that, okay, LaVontae, you want this bad
that's
because this one person didn't work. So usually what we do is we're going to shell up. We're like, oh, okay, see, that just tells me nobody's going to be able to help. I said, man, I can't do that because if my mind is still on this, I can't do this, man. I have to go forward in a way that's going to support me and support what I feel my future should be. And that right there just propelled me, even with it being difficult. And I will be honest, therapy was hard. And don't let nobody tell you it's not. Therapy was hard, man. And so even learning that I had OCD, that was a sign of relief. Like that made me feel so much better because I was like, okay, I'm not this broken person. Because that's what my mind had already pushed me to. And over the time span of, I want to say about 4 weeks, I seen myself go from this vibrant, charismatic, outgoing social person to this person that didn't understand love, this person that didn't want to go outside, didn't want to talk to people. I was not even a shell version of myself. I was as if I was this different person. And so getting the diagnosis of OCD just let me know, okay, this is something that's happening. That's one, and it was really hard for me to learn that it was chronic because that made it really sad for me. Because chronic meaning it's not going anywhere. It's here for your life. It's going to be here forever. And so that was something that was really difficult to me when I did get the diagnosis because I felt like, dang, I'm going to have to deal with it forever. I'm going to have to live my life this way forever.
when you said so, when you actually talked about that, you said that was the turning point, the transition. There's some things leading up to that, and so that's one of the other things you learned. A lot of times, when things are going on, we have our own preconceptions. We have information, sometimes misinformation from people on it.
Yeah.
So when you heard that, like you were saying, you would think, well, no, I'm not that, because not truly understanding, like they say, information is power. Not truly understanding that there's so many different things, probably so many
Yeah.
different levels, different phases, so many different places you may be at in regards to the particular illness or diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is something else that's been sort of like a theme in what we kind of talked about, is that the information is power, but also everybody has a different journey. Everybody's going to respond to things differently. Everybody has a different way. And that's why it's so important to be able to truthfully share what is exactly going on with you, to truthfully be honest and present, to be able to be honest with yourself and with others. Like, this is what's going on. This is how I'm feeling. So it kind of all ties into being the whole authenticity piece. But I wanted to, before we wrapped up, there's one more question I want to get into and ask you, and you kind of touched on a little bit, but we talked about misconceptions in regards to different things with families and different uh, beliefs that we have, to talk about generational things that come up in our lives. What is one thing that you want other Black men to know in regards to their mental health? The one thing you want to leave them with today as it relates to their mental health?
Hmm. So what I would say is, and that's a great question because yeah, I can get deep with that. Okay. So what I would say, biggest thing is no matter what, your mental health is your story. Share your story. Understand what you've been through. Understand what you've experienced and how that's played a role. It is okay to not be okay,
Mm-hmm.
but it is not okay to know that you're not okay and do nothing about it. And that is the hardest thing for us as men to recognize that one, we went through trauma, right? We can praise, oh yeah, I've been through all of this, but it's also okay to heal. And healing looks different for everyone. Don't have to go to therapy if you don't want to, but there is some work that you feel has to be done, and it is your job to be able to do that. No one else's. That trauma you've dealt with, that is now yours to own, and you have to choose intentionally that you want to heal, regardless of how it plays out.
Wow, powerful. Well, thank you for that so much, and thank you again for taking the time. Again, this was the opportunity to hear from different men, different Black men, in regards to the different things
Of
we
course.
discussed. How important it is to share your story. That your story is important for us
Yeah.
to and to hear the different experiences. So I definitely believe people are definitely going to be benefit from this
Love it.
conversation
Love
interview.
it.
And thank you so much. And again, for those guys looking at this, go on and put your feet again. Go on and touch that ground with your feet. It
Yeah.
do wonders for you. But again, the best to you, and we will definitely be in touch. And we continue to spread the word because, as you mentioned, it is our health, it's our story, and we got to tell it. So
Yeah.
thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity and time. I genuinely appreciate it. Thank you.
Right.